field of study is the timber industry, and they have been key players in the industry for over a century. Why are you asking me about them? Perhaps it could be useful for you to understand how we study the timber industry through archaeology. As an archaeologist, I study the remains and things that people left behind. The forested uplands of the Harney Basin have provided timber during various periods of our area's history. During the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, logging was typically conducted on a small, more localized scale. Sawmills sprang up in locations near timber stands or centralized activity centers. Eventually, the timber industry grew to accommodate a vast network of railroad grades used to transport materials, some of which later became extensive road systems we currently use for hauling via trucks. The timber industry even supported satellite work sites of various sizes and several specialized processing mills throughout the county. One of the largest and most well-known logging operations in Harney County was the Edward Hines Lumber Company, which in the 1920s was awarded one of the largest timber sales on federally managed lands in the Pacific Northwest. Archaeologists learned about the timber industry by studying materials like the structural remains of mills, including the timber from the structures themselves, and artifacts like saws, horseshoes, discarded fuel cans, and abandoned mechanical equipment. These artifacts illustrate the evolution of the nearly 100-year history of timber extraction. Archaeologists also study features like stumps or railroad grades to observe the history of specific places and time periods they represent. These clues help archaeologists determine the size and scale of the operations and their significance to the timber industry. For me as an archaeologist, I most enjoy studying the domestic materials of the people who lived and worked at these industrial sites. Domestic materials are the items often associated with homes or individuals. At a logging-related site, we typically see items associated with eating or cooking, like stove remains, cans, bottles, and dish fragments. We also see items associated with clothing people wore, like leather boots or buttons. We also see items associated with how people spent their free time when they were not working, like tobacco cans and gaming pieces. We even sometimes see items associated with children, which suggests that people were living at these locations. These findings provide a more in-depth look into the homes and households of the people who lived and worked at these sites. The archaeological record and preservation usually favors materials like stone, metal, glass, or ceramic. So historical archaeologists like myself also use photographs, archival, and documentary evidence to develop a bigger picture of the people and places we study. Ultimately, we can learn so much about our history by studying the daily lives of people in the places where they lived and worked. Now, what I think is of interest to your investigation is that not long ago, an older man came to ask me very similar questions to yours. I really don't know what Magnus looks like, but it could have been him. In the end, he kept muttering something about a simulation not matching, and I just sent him to meet a fellow archaeologist who specializes in rock art. I remember a man at Malheur Lake saying the very same thing a few years back. No idea what it could mean.